Hey guys, welcome back. So now with the Marvel Avengers game making its way here, and at the time of this video, I believe the release date is September 4th, which sounds far away, but really it's just a couple months out. But what I want to do in the meantime is talk about some of the pre-existing history of this universe, which gives us a bit of backstory for Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Captain America, and Black Widow. And with doing so, just gotta let you know, possible spoilers, because these events do contribute to the story mode, and they do include characters which we haven't seen in gameplay yet. So now let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch us spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so you can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping in and just kind of setting the stage, the prequels that we'll be getting into, they take place about 5 years before the event A-Day, which from what we've seen as far as a story mode, Avengers Day will be like where the story begins, and then from what we've seen, things go left. And as far as the gameplay that is shown, when the Avengers respond to this attack on A-Day, Captain America is killed, and this breaks up the Avengers. But then of course, sometime later, they reassemble once things with MODOK and AIM get out of hand, causing the heroes to get back together, which is more or less the gist of the story that we're heading towards. But as far as the build up leading into this narrative, the first issue that we're going to get into starts off with Iron Man. And with getting into this once again, like just previewing the 5 issues, they roughly take place 5 years prior to A-Day, but even with doing so, they're not like linear stories. But as we go through them, I do want to say that they all pretty much happen within that 5-year time frame. But once again, essentially starting this off with Iron Man, to where in his issue, we start off with the Avengers, who at this point in time are very cohesive, but even still they have their issues which are kind of boiling up between each other, which we'll get into more about in a little bit. But at this point in time, when they're responding to a call from Nick Fury, to where they've discovered that someone's been leaking information from S.H.I.E.L.D., and with doing so, giving out shipping information as far as time and routes to where certain weapons are being moved, and it's pretty much here where the Avengers discover that there's a mole within S.H.I.E.L.D. making this information available to a number of villains, to whom in this case are Absorbing Man, Titania, and Whirlwind. But with them having this confidential transit information, it gives them the opportunity to find out when's the easiest time for these weapons and this tech to be stolen. And so now those two things, they're the first issue, because 1, S.H.I.E.L.D. has a mole, and 2, villains are getting this information and they're moving on it. But the third problem that they're having is while they have stopped these villains before much quicker, but at this point in time on this day, like they suck. Tony's targeting system isn't locking, and overall really like their rhythm is just off. And it really isn't too long before they figure it out, to where they mainly do so by just switching opponents. But even with doing so, Tony figures out what the problem is, and it's not that there's a malfunction within his suit, but rather that there was something within the Beetle's suit that was giving him a leg up on Tony the whole time. But with getting the upper hand and mainly doing so by just trading off with who everyone was facing, it's here where Tony takes a look at the Beetle's suit, and with doing so, Tony recognizes that Abner Jenkins, he's an aircraft mechanic, so he's an intelligent engineer, but he's not Tony Stark. And so when Tony goes to check out like what kind of tech he's using and how Abner made Tony miss a number of shots that he would have made, it's here where we find out that the Beetle, Abner Jenkins, he's already applied Stark tech to his own suit. And so once Jenkins is detained by S.H.I.E.L.D., which kind of both reminds me of Iron Man 2 and Captain America Civil War, because Tony good for visiting people in jail. But it's here where Tony questions Jenkins, and he asks him where did he get the information, where did he get the secret Stark files, and pretty much the blueprints on how to modify his suit. But when Tony asks him, Jenkins just doesn't tell him anything. And with doing so, more or less responded to Tony like, I ain't no snitch. But after that, Tony pretty much just starts an investigation of his own, to where first he goes back to Stark Industries and he runs through his own protocols a number of times for like 3 hours straight. But with doing so, as he expects, his security is airtight. But after this then causes him to question his teammates. And with doing so, first he questions Natasha, to whom at this point in time within this game universe, she's fairly new to the Avengers. And for the most part, she's earned the trust of the team. But even still, Tony had to ask, because not long ago she was a Russian spy, so Tony just pretty much just walked up on her like, hey Natasha, you seen any moles around here? Which she didn't in relation to what he's talking about, but she did give him a few pointers on how to move forward with his investigation. But after Natasha, Tony then decides to go and ask Bruce, to where with doing so, he teases Bruce a little bit about some chemistry going on with Monica, Bruce's lab partner, which we'll talk about a bit more later, because it kind of seems like in this universe, like this is the version of Monica Rapaxini or something like that, like the Monica that Bruce had got when in the comics, and they had a daughter who became like Scorpion or something. And I say the comics like this ain't comics, but I mean like mainly from House of M, I think it was. I'm not sure if this is that, but it crossed my mind. But with getting in here to talk to Bruce, Tony uses a couple tricks to mask their conversation, and make it sound like they're arguing about mayonnaise, but rather Tony was asking Bruce if he knew anything about the leaked information, which unfortunately Bruce didn't know about, but even still with having this conversation with Bruce to still be careful and look out for potential moles. But not long after this, with Tony continuing his own investigation, and with doing so making up his own little sting operation to where he just placed some new data or generic files on the SHIELD server, and with doing so he just waited to see who was going to try and steal it, which was a plan that was pretty clever and it worked, because this then caused him to find his mole, to whom as it turned out it was Spy Master, aka Ted Calloway. And with seeing this guy here, like, it was a deep Iron Man cut, because he had first appeared in Iron Man issue number 33 back in 1971, and through the years, like in your 616 universe, he would like pop up and try to steal Stark tech whenever Tony Stark was busy with some major event. But as it turns out, around this time he lets Tony know that the damage is done, because for a while now he's been stealing Tony Stark's tech, and for the most part like blueprints and APIs, but he's been taking them and selling them for the highest bidder on the dark web, to where he admits that there's been some huge buyers lately. But with Tony discovering this, it more so lets him know that he's got a bone to pick with Nick Fury, because much like in the films where Tony's been helping out SHIELD and designing weapons for SHIELD so they can help out the Avengers, Tony then also comes to the realization that Nick Fury has been backing up more of Tony's work than Tony has been comfortable with, which then presents the issue of SHIELD not being as secure as Stark Industries. But it's for that reason that Tony lets Fury know that from here forward he's completely keeping his work on his own servers, and like on the spot in mid conversation he then wipes SHIELD servers of all of their Stark tech so this won't happen again. And that's pretty much like your Iron Man portion for your first issue, which kind of gives us a tease of how the Avengers have not only been falling out of sync for some time, but also quite some time before the A-Day incident, Tony has also had a huge falling out with SHIELD. And so from here, after Iron Man, we then go to issue 2, which is Thor, to where in the case of Thor, prior to A-Day, we see that he's been helping out Tony, to where with doing so, for the most part, he's needed Thor to power his new devices, but in addition, he's also been asking Thor to assist him as far as providing power so that Tony can create a device that'll mimic the functionality of the Bifrost. Because initially one of the first projects that Tony asked Thor to assist him with is the creation of your Stark portal, which likely during the course of the game this will be the means what we use to like fast travel across the map. But at this point in time, which is roughly like your 5 years ago, the Stark portals were very much in your beta stage, and they weren't necessarily something that worked out the first time around, which for one caused a little friction between Tony and Bruce, with each of them believing that the other one was off and that's why it malfunctioned. And in the middle of while they're arguing, Thor asks Heimdall to open the Bifrost so they can just look at it and copy it, I don't know. But even with what we see here, it leads into Bruce's story, which will be coming next, to where Tony mentions that Bruce, he noticed that he's a bit more angrier than usual. And of course Bruce's explanation is that he got a lot going on, but in addition to that, it doesn't help that while the Bifrost was open, Loki made his way through, and with doing so, and Loki just being Loki, he of course then instigates an altercation between the Hulk and Thor, to where with doing so he changes the words which Thor says, and vice versa with Banner, which ultimately translated to "nuck if you buck." And as we all know, when Banner's rage meets Thor's arrogance, things get broken. And when I say things, I mean like buildings. But I gotta say, like, even with their fight and what we see in the prequel comics, it lines up a lot with what the developers have told us to expect so far, with a lot of moves in the game matching up one-to-one with the films. Because a lot of the moves we see within this battle between Hulk and Thor, they are straight out of the first Avengers film. But the fight between the two of them is more or less resolved when Thor realizes that this whole thing has been instigated by Loki. But at this point, as far as the view of the public eye, like, that doesn't even matter. Because as far as this fight between the Hulk and Thor, to the general public, this just looks like the two of them tearing up the place. But on top of that, I do like that this lets us know that to some capacity, like, Loki will be involved in this new universe that the game is setting up, which I feel like is something we won't see in the near future, but I do believe it'll definitely contribute to later expansions down the road. But that does it for issue 2, which is Thor. And I gotta say, like, with what they showed us as far as the Bifrost and the gameplay, like, I think that's gonna be sick. But now that we wrapped on issue 2 with Thor, from here we'll go to issue 3, which is the Hulk. And what we come to find out, like, in this universe with Banner, he's still in that place to where he's trying to do what he can to get rid of the Hulk and eliminate his dichotomy between man and monster. And it's through the course of this process where he's being assisted by Monica, whose last name I don't believe we get throughout the issues, but I'm pretty sure she's the same Monica, or at least this universe's version of Monica from House of M. But with helping Banner, they have their own version of sun's going down, sun's getting low, which in their case is more of a numbing mist with a mixture of classical music. And so in other words, Bath and Body Works with the Calm app. But in the game universe, like, that's the thing for Bruce to actually get the Hulk to turn back into Bruce. But one of the reasons why I believe that this is the Monica to where her and Bruce eventually have a child, it's mainly because there is a bit of a love interest there, but also there's a bit of a conflict because at the same time that she's trying to help Bruce, her definition of helping him is more so geared towards helping him control the Hulk rather than get rid of it altogether, which in their case stirs more of a conflict within itself. But it's also here where we get the introduction of George Talton, who from the name alone we know later on will become MODOK, and that we've also kind of got a glimpse of in some of the more recent trailers. But Tarleton, he also has a bit of jealousy for Banner, mainly because he's also interested in Monica, which will likely be something in the story mode later. But as Banner would describe Tarleton, he's the type to think himself smarter than everyone else in the room, and though he is very intelligent, Banner also notices that he's very much likely to rush his work, which in most cases causes more harm than good. And with that description, we also get a quick example of that when he rushes an energy project which he wanted to show Bruce, which instead goes out of control and merges 2 security guards into like one pure energy creature, which then causes Banner to Hulk out and take care of it. But this is a primary example of one of the things which caused Banner and Tarleton to be at odds with one another, because no one knows better than Banner how wrong something can go if an experiment or a project is pushed too fast too soon. But when this happens, the Hulk is able to handle the situation, and doing so by leading the creature towards water, which eventually shorted it out. And so now after this, we then go to Steve Rogers, Captain America, who in his case, his narrative is pretty quick and there's not like a lot that we're given, and mainly because I believe like his narrative within the story mode is going to be pretty secretive. And if I had to guess or even place a bet, I'd have to say like the whole thing with him dying on A-Day, that it's more likely that he's just going to use that cover with people believing that he's dead and likely just be having some kind of side mission. But in his case, during the prequel, he's facing off with Batroc the Leaper, who in his case, like he is a Z-list villain, and I mean like generally he has some fighting skills because he is proficient in French kickboxing, but aside from that, all he does is jump real high, and basically he's usually just a work for hire, and ultimately his greatest ambition is just jumping out the gym. But when Cap is facing off with this dude, he's like, look, I got somewhere to be. And in Captain America's case, he's referring to a funeral for a formal corporal. Man, that felt hard to say. For a formal corporal. Like, pause the video and say that 5 times fast. For a formal corporal. Maybe it's just me. Let me know in the comments if you had trouble with that too. But Cap is able to make his way out of there fairly quick because the truck which the Leaper was trying to rob, it ended up being empty anyway. And because of that, the Leaper then just leaped on about his business. But with Cap finally making his way to the funeral, and with doing so just reminiscing on veteran Corporal Clarence Davis, he also mentions that his close friend was one of the frontline soldiers in this experimental unit, to where this unit would get ridiculous access to all types of information, mainly because they could decipher this intel quickly and just like that be one step ahead of the enemy. But with this, Cap also mentions that him and Davis were fairly close, and that's why this affected him in a huge way. But after the funeral, we then find out that the Leaper, he had placed a tracker on that empty truck, to where with doing so, he followed that truck back to a shield armory. But Cap ended up finding this out by going to the armory and really just doing so just to take another look at this truck, because he felt like the Leaper had given up too easily and the whole thing just seemed off. But with discovering this, it then gives Cap the idea to reach out to Tony and come up with some type of system similar to his friend George, which would help them be one step ahead of their enemy so that they can plan ahead accordingly instead of just getting lucky, because that's not something that's just gonna pan out like that every time. And so now after this, we then go on to Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow. And in her case, unlike the others, her story kind of pans through the whole 5-year period. Because for her, going into the game, like into the story mode, at this point, she's been with S.H.I.E.L.D. about 5 years. And with her issue, we pick up from the beginning to where she's given a hard time by a number of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who feel some type of way about one, her beating them all up during training, but also the whole fact of her recently being a Russian spy. Which that part, I don't mind because it makes sense. And along with this, like one of the agents makes a very valid point, because when Fury stops the training, like right before one of them blasts her with a sonic cannon, the dude that was about to hit her with the cannon, he's like, hey, just to be honest, it feels a little weird, not only because she was a recent spy, but on top of that, it's like she's still wearing her old call sign. And I'm telling you guys, like, I get it, because it's almost like LeBron running around in LA in a Cleveland jersey, talking about, nah, you can pass me the rock. Like, the suspicions are valid. But early on, we learned that she's earned Fury's trust mainly through her actions, and because of that, he vouches for her hard. But even with doing so, now that she's with S.H.I.E.L.D., he wants to make sure that she knows how to work with the team, and because of that, Fury orders her to train with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s cohesion officer, Tony Masters, who once again from the name alone, we know that this will be Taskmaster. And at this point we find out very quickly that he already has his photographic reflexes. But though we don't have like the full origin story about how he got his powers in the game universe, but I do got a link below to where I talked about his origin and how that came about in the main 616 Marvel universe. But during the time that he's giving Natasha her cohesion training, he of course is watching closely and just studying her every move. But also with doing so, he notices that her style is very different, and he notices that it's not like a capoeira or a taekwondo, and she lets him know that rather instead that is ballet. But a few weeks later, Fury then lets Natasha know that she's ready to leave from her cohesion training and make her way into the field working with teams. And on top of that, he even tells her like he should have had her out there capturing these Hydra agents, because recently S.H.I.E.L.D. just brought a number of Hydra agents in who they plan to extract information from. But with doing so, they organize and escape like the next day. But when this happens, it's quickly recognized as an inside job. But on top of that, it's quickly handled because Natasha, she had pretty much just cut them all off at their exit and beat them all into a pile, keeping them from leaving. Which once again is one of those things that you would think like doing something like this would prove her loyalty. But when Fury and the other agents, they come around the corner and they see this, Fury tells everyone to stand down, it's handled, but Tony Masters tells Fury no, that there's actually one perpetrator left. And with doing this, of course he means Natasha Romanoff. And when this happens, Masters claims that he has proof that Natasha Romanoff organized this escape, and that this proof makes it appear that she's been a double agent this whole time. And when Fury asks to see this proof, Masters then shows him footage of Natasha Romanoff moving through the laser security like only she could, and making her way through to release these prisoners. And when Natasha sees this, she immediately lets Masters know that he's made a mistake. And when telling him this, she then cuts the sleeve of his shirt, revealing his shoulder, because she lets him know like, look, Masters, you've been copying my moves, and as far as copies go, you're pretty close to perfect. But what Natasha noticed with watching that footage was that whoever that was trying to move exactly like her, that their footing was slightly off and that they would have been burned on their top right shoulder. Which then makes it obvious at this point that it was Masters in that footage attempting to frame Natasha Romanoff. And even at this point, though they've done much training together, and Masters is able to keep up with Natasha, but with doing so he doesn't necessarily fully have her fighting style down to a T, which then causes her to best him within this fight, but ultimately he gets away by stealing one of the confiscated Hydra ships just shortly after. But when this happens, it's not over yet, because right after Masters gets away, Fury then confronts Natasha, telling her that she's not completely in the clear. Because it's here where Fury lets Natasha know that he's planted his own cameras, which were separate from the main security, which actually caught Natasha stealing codes to the cells, meaning that she was planning to free someone. And she tells him right away like it's true. She did steal the codes and she had planned to break out Osip Stepanov, who as it turns out, he's Natasha's former ballet teacher. And she mainly just wanted to break him out because when she was in the Red Room, he was the only person who showed her any sign of kindness. And really for her, it was that kindness that at a young age, it really helped her get through much of her harsh training. And it was mainly for that reason that she wanted to return that favor to Stepanov, because at this point he's like 70 years old and she didn't want him to just grow old and die just cooped up in a cell. And with hearing this, like Fury, he isn't even mad at all. And on top of that, he actually lets Stepanov out, and from there he just puts in the books that the guy just died of old age, which was nice of Fury to do as a favor for Natasha. But in return, he only asked that Natasha just be fully transparent with him rather than feel like she has to operate alone all the time. And in her response, which for her is kind of like a way of meeting him in the middle, because Fury also mentions that when she left Russia, that she's more or less made a new allegiance to a completely different organization. But in response, she does let Fury know, like just honestly, she's not in allegiance with anyone, and mainly because she refuses to be that spy who's completely dedicated to someone else's cause. But as she would describe it, like if she does have any allegiance, it's mainly towards doing what she believes to be right. And for the most part, what she feels like is right, it aligns with Fury's leadership, and for Natasha, that gives her a new feeling like this is what a home should be. But so now from here, fast forward 5 years later, which takes us much closer to where the game story begins. It's here where Fury shares intel with Natasha, letting her know that Tony Masters has resurfaced, but now he's going by the name Taskmaster, which from there of course takes us into the story. And that's pretty much it from the prequels. And I gotta say, like overall, out of all the stories, hands down Natasha's was the best one. But all in all, they each serve their purpose of giving us some type of information to like what this universe has going on in the background, which likely will resurface in some form or way throughout the story mode. But also up to this point, I've been trying to find out like what exact Earth designation that this is as far as this Gamerverse, so that way we would know what Earth number this is exactly. And I've seen a number of people go back and forth and say like this was Earth 1048, Ultimate, which of course is the same universe as the Spider-Man PS4 game, but up to this point I haven't found anything official proving that. And I mean, it'd be cool if it was, because that would make this the same Taskmaster from the Spider-Man PS4 game. But until I find anything official that confirms that, I'ma just hold off until we hear something directly about that from Crystal Dynamics or directly from Sony. But real quick before we go, I want to give a shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here and you want more information on how to support the channel, I got a link down below where you can head to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and let me know if you're excited to get your hands on this game in September. Because like for me, I'm still trying to decide like what platform I'm gonna play it on, because most of my friends, they're on Xbox, though I'd much rather PC, because ultra wide and extra frames make everything better. And as far as PlayStation, I only really get games for PlayStation that are exclusive. But recently I'd taken a poll on Twitter because I wanted to know like what platform all of you guys play on, and this poll is still live on Twitter till like June 29th. But from looking at these numbers, 60% of you guys is like PlayStation. Like PlayStation is blowing everything else out the water. Like it's crazy. But also there's a few of you guys playing it on Stadia, so let me know how that goes. But overall, I'm still making my decision, and I think I'll have that final decision once they give more information on how they're handling the crossplay. Because if you can play with people on other platforms, then at that point it really just won't matter. Unless you like that one Avenger on Stadia and you lagging like crazy. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Stadia shade.